Hi everyone, it's Howard from Startup Remarkable here, and today I have the great honor of having Hal Gregersen, author of new book, The Innovator's DNA, recently out on Amazon and that, and it's a great pleasure to have you here, Hal.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Great, and today we were just going to, after reading the book, really wanted to just have a quick chat about what is it that makes us an innovator, and what really kind of practical steps can entrepreneurs like ourselves take to be more innovative?
Entrepreneurs do what I'm going to describe naturally, and for many of us who maybe aren't as naturally innovative, we can become the same way. And so what it comes down to is we've often heard of the tune or the notion, think differently. And what we discovered with this research, looking at incredibly disruptive innovators, was that they think differently because they act differently. And if you were to walk into their everyday world and be able to watch what they do, they engage in behaviors that help them get creative ideas. And so they're always provoking the world with these questions that just really upset people sometimes, but they're trying to get underneath the surface of what's going on here to figure out how might we do things differently. What if we did it this way? Why not that way? Now they observe, they put these eyes on where they're observing like anthropologists, and they basically, they pay really careful attention to the world. And they talk to a lot of different people. We call it networking for ideas. Now it's talking to people who not only don't look like us, but who think differently than we do to provoke new ideas. And finally, they have this experimental approach to the world. It might be experimenting with food. It might be trying something different, going to a new place on a vacation. It might also be a willingness to just try something different at work to be able to figure out a better way. So they really act differently to think differently.
Great. And reading the book, I'd say it was a great fun book to write, because you're studying some really, really exciting people. And at what point do you think this is something that, you talk about Jeff Bezos a lot and Steve Jobs a lot, and is this something that they always did, or did they learn it, or?
I think it's a fun question, which is, a fun way to answer the question is to remember that Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and other incredibly well-known founders of these innovative companies, they were once 4-year-olds. And when I walk around the world, wherever I go, whatever country I'm in, 4-year-olds act like 4-year-olds. I don't care if they're famous or not. Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs were not famous when they were 4-year-olds. But they did what you and I did, They asked the 4-year-old kinds of questions. Why not? Why this? Why that? They observed carefully. They talked to different people. They tried all kinds of new things. They think laterally or associationally, connecting the unconnected. We did it all when we were 4 years old. And so what's unique about many of these innovators is that when they were growing up from 4 years old to 24 years old, they had adults in their world, either in schooling systems or at home or their community, that said, guess what? Don't let go of those skills. Keep them running. Make them go. And so some of it is the world we live in. It's not just some. It's really about 60 or 70% of anybody's innovation capability does not come from their DNA. It comes from practice. It comes from doing certain things. About 30% of it does. But that's the small portion. The big portion is just doing things differently.
Great. And that I suppose leads nicely on to the next question, which I suppose one of the things I thought was great about the book is that it has lots of really practical tips, and you'll see I have them marked here in the book. It was a great read. And so I suppose you kind of outline 5 core areas how we can become more innovative in the book, and maybe could you just briefly bring us through them and maybe give us one of the practical kind of tips, how we might be able to implement them?
The logical way of thinking through them is most innovation starts with a question. So it's essentially, I've got to get a new question and generate a better way of thinking about things by asking provocative questions. That's the first piece. The second piece becomes, I don't just sit in my chair inside of my office asking clever questions. And what we know from the research is that if I do that, I'm not going to get great ideas that actually create value. In other words, they generate something that somebody else wants. So if I start asking productive questions and then get out of my office and either go make observations of actual people to see, what are their needs, what's the job to be done, what could we do here that could be done differently, or it might be that I literally talk to a lot of different people in a systematic way, or I go out and I experiment with the world and I try different things to see how it might help me get some new ideas. When I do that stuff, that's how I generate the new idea. So, when Mark Benioff got the idea for Salesforce.com, he didn't just sit in his office. And he worked for 20 years at Cisco, figuring out enterprise software systems. And then he sold a lot of them to small and medium size enterprises, but it really didn't work great. And they weren't doing a fantastic job at selling it to them. So he takes a sabbatical. He experiments by going off to India. And he talks with these incredibly spiritual people about the world, and he explores that place. And he also talks to a real wide variety of interesting entrepreneurs, people who see the world differently, and technology people. And then he gives himself time to put this all together, and at some point he's swimming in the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, with the dolphins, and it all comes together. He connects the unconnected. What if we sold enterprise-level software like Amazon sells books? It's like putting these two things together, and that creates cloud computing, and we know the story. But that's how we do it. We literally engage in those actions in order to get the new ideas.
Yeah, I remember that was a great story. I really enjoyed it. Swimming with dolphins for it, especially. And one of the things you mentioned there about asking the right questions, there's one of the tips you talk about is question storming. Now, I'd never heard of it before, and I was just like, that's such a good idea. Kind of a flip on brainstorming, asking the questions instead of trying to come up with all the answers. And do you have any examples of people that have used that, and it's, I suppose, opened up opened up the answers to the questions they were looking for?
No, absolutely. And so I've watched people use this individually, and we've worked with executive teams doing it as a team. And essentially, when we get to the point that we're stuck trying to figure out a solution to a problem, and all of us, whether it be personal or professional, we have some sort of problem that we don't have a solution to. It might be a relationship issue, or it might be a professional, technical kind of issue, but we don't have a solution. We've thought about it, we've wrestled with it, we've tried to figure it out, but it's just, we're not getting anywhere. You know those moments, right? When we hit that moment, that's the point at which this question storming can be powerful. And so it might be that I'm trying to figure out a better way of selling something. And what I would do individually would be get a journal, paper-based journal, electronic journal, iPad, whatever, and every day keep a journal. And for 5 minutes write down questions, nothing but questions about the problem. And if we do that day after day, it's inevitable that within 7 to 10 days, we'll start asking very different questions. And that's the key pivotal point, because I can't get a new solution if I don't ask a different question. It just goes with the territory. And so that's how these folks do it. They literally brainstorm questions at an individual level by asking the questions along the way. I was working with one company that was trying to get a more positive brand image out there in the world. And what we literally did with the group of senior executives was figuring out, we did a question storming where the group of people asked nothing but questions. You get a big whiteboard, you get some markers, you tell everybody, shut up if you don't have a question to ask, and let's just ask nothing but questions. And you demand at least 50 questions about the problem before you let go. So it's question, 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 question. You write them down. You look at the questions. You think about it. What could be different here? How could I see this differently? And what happens is, when we question storm, what I notice is sometimes people who don't say anything actually have the best questions. And they're provocative, and they generate new perspectives. And so what we did, by the time we got down to question 73 in that question storming exercise, number one, people are a little bit tired because they're not used to thinking in questions. And it's like a muscle that never gets used. And they said, this is just exhausting at one level. But they realized when they went back and looked at those questions, they were asking the wrong question in order to get a better brand image. And it led them down an entirely different path than what they were doing.
Okay. So using that example then, they would go through all the questions, look to answer them, but they would see, as going through that process, which are, I suppose, the questions they should be asking.
Well, if you go through that individually or as a group, and you got this big long list of questions, then at that point it's like, okay, which of these are worth pursuing? And one of the questions about the question might be, again, which one is surprising? Which one is surprising enough that it's like, wow, I never quite thought of that. And if we had the answer to that, it might give us the solution here. And so the question then becomes the foundation from which I go out and do something with the question. I go out and make some observations in a different industry or in a different country about that particular issue. I go out and I talk to 5 different people. And these things are practical things, just like question storming. It's literally putting on my agenda or my schedule, is putting 3 different lunches, 1 per week for the next 3 weeks, with somebody in a completely different industry or a completely different country of origin or a completely different technical professional background than I have, and talking with them about the problem we have. One organization, TBWA, when they do advertising campaigns, they haul in boxes of hats and shirts from innovative companies. So I might be working for IBM, and I'm bringing in a bunch of hats and T-shirts from Apple and from Virgin and from Amazon and from Google, and they literally put on the hat of that company and they say, okay, if I worked for Apple, how would I look at this problem? And that's what ID networking is doing. It's getting me in the perspective of somebody else and how would they look at this problem. It's a great way to get new ideas.
Fantastic. That's great, Hal. I'm conscious of time. There's lots of other areas I'd like to speak to you about, and I suppose the Medici effect that you talk about with networking. I suppose it's the first time, because it's one of these things that networking we all know we should be doing, but it's the first time I've really heard it articulated why it actually is such an important advantage. Could you just explain the Medici effect to us very briefly?
Well, Franz Johansson wrote a great book called The Medici Effect, and it's essentially you get new ideas when you live in the intersection. And I live near Paris, and it's fascinating to drive around the Arc de Triomphe. And it's got 12 major streets coming into that circular road around the Arc. And when you go into that intersection, it's a given. If you get in an accident, it's both parties' fault. It goes with the intersection. You're going to bump into each other. And what innovators do when they network for ideas or when they try to generate new ideas, they intentionally go into the intersection where they're going to bump into new perspectives and bump into new ideas and bump into data they've never seen before. And it's in that bumping, in the intersection, that we create this Medici effect, which that word comes from the Renaissance period in Italy, where the Medici family brings together people from all over the world, different professional backgrounds, different interests, drop them into this part of Italy, and the family literally supports this explosion of new ideas. So that's what we can do, not just out there, but we can do it in here. We create that intersection, that Medici effect in our heads by going out, discovering new things, experiencing new things, talking to different people. And then when we're pushed into a corner and we've got to create a new idea, we have all this stuff that we've bumped into that can give us a great new idea.
Fantastic. Great advice. Well, I'll just ask you one more question, Hal, and before we finish up. And if you were then, knowing everything you know now about what makes a good innovator, what kind of one piece of advice, really kind of practical piece of advice somebody could put into action today would you give to, say, a young entrepreneur just starting up a new business?
Go with your strengths when it comes to these innovation skills. Some people love to watch the world. They're observers. Other people love to talk to people. They're idea networkers. Others, they tinker. They experiment. They just try new different things. Number one, know what your strength is. What do you love to do and what are you good at? Number two is make sure that you spend time, even when you're starting a new business and you don't have time to do it, to keep that skill alive. Do it. Force yourself to do it because you never quite know what person you're going to talk to, what situation you're going to pay attention to with your observations that might be critical at the next stage of your business. So, know who you are. We've got this really great assessment that you can potentially use that gives people data around, who are you in terms of these skills. It's at innovatorsdna.com, but basically it helps us know who we are, leverage those skills, and if we do them regularly, and it's just short amounts of time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, it compiles, it compounds. It, at some point, leads us to something really good.
Fantastic. Great advice. Well, thanks very much, Hal.
You're welcome.
Again, everybody, the Innovator's DNA is available on Amazon, and you've also the website innovatorsdna.com.
That's it, yeah.
Well, fantastic. And I highly recommend it. It's got some great stuff. So thanks for joining us, Hal.
Howard, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
You bet. Bye-bye.